How to write a DBQ. So here is our English Reformation DBQ. The prompt is, using the documents and your knowledge of world history, describe the attitude Henry VIII's wives had towards him. And here we have 6 documents. First one here, second one, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And each of these is written by one of Henry VIII's 6 wives. So what we're answering here is, according to these documents, what attitudes did Henry's wives have towards him? So the first thing we do is contextualization. All right, these are the 7 components of a DBQ. And in the 4 paragraphs that we write, total of 4 paragraphs, we include these 7 total. Not all of these in every paragraph, but in total in the 4 paragraphs, we try to include all 7 of these. So starting with contextualization, this is where we describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. By that I mean, what happened before, in this case, Henry having so many wives, that led to him having so many wives. The contextualization is the first half of the first paragraph, and in this, you write 3 sentences where you talk about what led up to what the prompt is asking. So 3 sentences about why Henry had so many wives. Some things you could talk about would be his wanting a son, his not having a son with his first wife, his break from the Catholic Church, etc. Then the second half of your first paragraph is the thesis. Okay? The thesis is your 3-sentence answer to the prompt. And in every thesis, you need 3 distinct answers. So in this case, your thesis is going to be 3 attitudes that Henry VIII's wives had towards him. So what you do is you read through these documents and determine what attitudes they had towards him. And then you write that in 3 sentences for your thesis. So for example, you could say, one attitude that many of Henry's wives had towards him was an attitude of forgiveness or devotion or whatever you find in these documents. Put those 3 attitudes in your 3-sentence thesis. Now, for the remainder of your essay, you're going to be proving those 3 thesis points. And you do that in 3 evidence paragraphs. So we already did the first paragraph, that's contextualization and thesis. Your next 3 paragraphs, your last 3 paragraphs, are all about proving those 3 thesis points to be correct with evidence mostly from the documents. And each of your 3 evidence paragraphs is going to be devoted to proving one of your 3 thesis points. So if your first thesis point is that Henry's wives were forgiving to him, then that's going to be the first sentence of your second paragraph, or your first evidence paragraph, you could call it. Then you are going to explain what the evidence is in these documents that prove that point. So for example, if any of these documents talk about one of his wives forgiving him or saying they wish him well or no ill will, then you put that in this evidence paragraph. Say something like, his wife Jane said this. You'll say something like, his wife Jane said this, which shows that she forgave him, etc., etc. And then after you provide that evidence from a document, at the end of that sentence, in parentheses, you put the document number. You say Doc 3, Doc 4, whatever it is. And in total, you're going to be using at least 4 of the documents. Now, in a regular DBQ, there are 7 documents. In this one, there's only 6. It's just one I made. So you have to use at least 4 of them for evidence. And when I look through your 3 evidence paragraphs, I need to see at least 4 times where you put in parentheses doc and then the number, so I know which documents you used for your evidence. All right, now at least twice in your entire essay, you need to provide what's called analysis. An analysis is where you explain the point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience of the document. Now, you only do this for 2 of the 4 documents you use. That's 2 total in the entire essay. So for example, your first evidence paragraph could have 1 analysis, your second evidence paragraph could have another analysis, and then your third doesn't need any because you have 2. So what this is you choose one of those 4 analyses. We call it HAP, H-A-P-P, historical situation, audience, point of view, or purpose, and you explain what it is for one of the documents you used. For example, if you're saying that the attitude towards the king by Henry's wives was joyful, you would then put evidence from, let's say, document 3 about Jane being joyous. Then you would put in parentheses doc 3. But then to analyze that document, you would say the audience of this letter is Henry, or the historical situation of this letter is right before she died. Or the point of view is, that means what does the author believe that she's trying to convince the audience of? Or what's the purpose? Why did she write it in the first place? And then explain how that information helps support your thesis point that her attitude was joyous. Then, once total in all of this essay, you need to include at least 1 piece of evidence beyond the documents, or EBD. That is 1 fact that's not found in the documents that still supports one of your 3 thesis points. For example, you could say some evidence beyond the documents to support the claim that his wives were devoted to him is the fact that none of them tried to divorce him and none of them said no when he proposed. Something simple like that that's not in the documents but is still true and backs up your point. And then the last point is complexity. There are 2 ways to get complexity. Either you use all of the documents for evidence instead of just 4, or you could provide 3 counterclaims. A counterclaim is what you put at the end of each of the 3 evidence paragraphs, where you say, however, and then explain the alternate viewpoint. So for example, if one of your evidence paragraphs is all about how Henry's wives had a loving attitude towards him, you'd give all your evidence, you'd cite your documents, you'd analyze, and then at the end you would say, however, this wife does not mention love in her document, therefore not all of them had the same attitude. Okay, so just to kind of modify your argument a little bit to show that there is another way to view it. So once again, total, we're looking at 4 paragraphs. The first one is contextualization and thesis, and your next 3 are devoted to each of your 3 thesis claims. In this case, each of your 3 attitudes that you believe Henry's wives had towards him based on what you read.